So, as entrepreneurs, we have a lot of turmoil going on, a lot of things happening between working from home and AI, and you got this DEI stuff and all this kind of stuff. So, today on the Wealthability Show, we're going to discover how to build a successful work culture in this scattered work environment. And we have an expert in this area, Jennifer Moss, who wrote the book, Why Are We Here? I think that's the question that every entrepreneur asks themselves every day. Why are we here? And then the subtitle I love is Creating a Work Culture Everyone Wants. And I want to add in there, I hope that including the owner that wants that work culture. It's not just the employees. We've been in a situation lately where employees have had so much power because there's been such a shortage. I'm convinced there's a shortage because people are so-called working from home and they're not really working that many hours, and that's why there's a shortage. But we'll get into that. So we'll talk about working from home and how do you create a culture when people aren't there. So that's, or do you just have to bring them all back? So with that, Jennifer, welcome to the Wealthability Show. And if you would, give us a little of your background and how you got to studying company culture.
That's a great question, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be provocative and insightful, I think, for many of your entrepreneurs, because I have to say, I was an entrepreneur myself. I had a tech startup really early on in the days of well-being and wellness, and people, a lot of CFOs were like, really, happiness at work? Shouldn't you just come in and do your job and get paid? And we were trying to convince them otherwise. And so we went from a startup to a stay up and then ended up, moving the organization into a larger organization. So, we as entrepreneurs have a really difficult time taking care of ourselves. We're constantly thinking of feeding our staff. We feed ourselves last. I mean, it's an exhausting process. And if you're ever in fundraising, I mean, it's just really difficult. And I have to say, as a woman, it's even harder. So I get that hustle and burnout that happens with entrepreneurs. And, my background was in journalism, actually, and then it led me to work with an organization called Robert Half International, and I was working in research when it was all, employment, labor market research, and then we had this kind of moment where my husband, who's a pro athlete, ended up getting really sick and acutely paralyzed, and it was in that moment where we realized that so many athletes get coached early on, but when you're a high performing person and you're not, like he had a lacrosse stick, or he had a puck, you don't get that same sort of development. And so we went on to try to create that. And when we started to combine those ideas of looking at well-being and wellness and also leadership, that's when we looked at culture and realized it's really broken, especially for entrepreneurs.
So let me start with kind of the basic question. How do you define culture?
That's a great question. I mean, culture, it's so funny because I talk about culture like you can feel it in the walls and you can feel it in your sense of cohesion, in your sense of connectivity. You have shorthand with someone. You feel it when you walk in the office and people are feeling engaged and positive. There's an energy, there's relational energy. All of that is a sense that people feel when culture is good. When culture is bad, people are not friendly with one another, they're disconnected, they're less productive, they're less engaged. And so, culture is a feeling, and culture is really foundational when it comes to successful organizations. And that means you have to have an ecosystem approach to culture. That means employees need to show up. They can't show up with learned helplessness. They need to do the work themselves on psychological fitness and mindset. And employers have to do the work to make sure that when people show up, they're not detracting from their psychological fitness and their resiliency. So it has to be working together. And when they work together and a culture is really fueled, it is sort of baked into this culture of caring, where you just care about each other, you care about the success of the business, and you have a shared vision that you're working towards.
So I see that so I've had multiple businesses over my career. I found that very not that difficult in when everybody prior to 2020, when everybody was in the office. Since then, I found it very, very, very difficult. And what we're seeing is more and more companies requiring their employees to come back to work, to the office. And I've got to wonder if it isn't part of it because that culture. How do you develop? I mean, particularly with new employees, okay, with people who were there in 2019, you'd already developed a culture, a little easier to continue that even when you're not in a physical presence, but physical energy is different than virtual energy. I mean, if we were doing this conversation in person, it would be a different energy than it is online. The energy gets dispersed. In my view, it gets dispersed when you're on Zoom or any other virtual media. So, how do you do that in a virtual environment? I mean, that's my first question. Or is it even possible?
One of the things that we are learning about kind of this new workforce and why I wrote Why Are We Here? It's an existential question for an existential, time, I think. The reason why we're having such a difficulty in engaging people right now is that we're not recognizing that human beings just developed a totally new framework and heuristic over the last few years. And you're talking about trying to go back to existing frameworks, and we need to rethink the whole experience of work and the whole experience of being in the office. We can't just kind of use a Men in Black kind of light flash in front of people's eyes and have them forget what it was like to have that kind of flexibility. And flexibility for people means freedom. And I wrote this chapter in the book about freedom. We are so genetically embedded and connected to our sense of freedom. And what happens and what happened over the pandemic, humans kind of developed I shouldn't say, humans, the workforce, anyone that was working, developed this feeling of freedom from being able to have, again, that like ability to be flexible, the ability to pick up kids if you need to at the end of the day, or, doing some of those things that made you feel like you had more work-life balance. All of the data shows that we were, just as productive or even more productive working remotely. So when the data comes in to say, actually, these return to office mandates aren't necessarily improving that cohesion or that connectedness, disengagement is still low and even lower for those that had return to office mandates. Talent leaves when we have a return to office mandate. You look at team building and relationships, the relational energy is gone. And this is Stanford research by, Nick Bloom and Mark Ma. And one of the reasons I think is that when you give someone freedom and you claw it back, we will fight at all personal costs to hold on to that. And so we're dealing with behavioral, mindset. And that mindset is to now resist, is to rebel, even if it is good for us. We feel like something was taken away. And so leaders recognizing that there's a root cause that we have to address, not just kind of tell everyone they have to come back. We need to realize that there is a sense of rebellion happening in the workforce. And on top of that, we are still having people come back in the office and doing the same things they could be doing at home. So then it feels arbitrary. The office needs to be a place where people come in and they connect, they collaborate, where it's moments that matter, like Microsoft does, where it's 50% time. You don't necessarily have to come in through a commute. You're there for a very specific reason, and that's for onboarding. Maybe it's a real like sprint with new onboards, the younger generation coming in, giving them a sprint where they're in the office like every day for 6 weeks to 2 months, but then we give them that flexibility. It's about creating bonding when we're there, not just sitting on a Zoom meeting with some other person. All of these things need to be rethought, and we haven't rethought them. And that's where we're seeing the disengagement and the disconnect happen.
So I'm going to be a little skeptic here, if that's okay.
Yes.
Kind of push it a little bit because, um, I'm a CPA. I have hundreds of clients, and not one of my clients feels like their workforce has been as productive at home as they were when they were in the office. So I don't know what the studies, who they're looking at. Maybe they're looking at Google. Maybe they're not looking at the small business. I don't know, but I'm just saying that's not the feeling that is out there. Okay. And yes, there are some people that do, but I will tell you, when I go to the gym, I'm working all sorts of hours, right? So I'm like, I start my morning at 6 and I end it when it ends. So I take, when I can, I take that time to go to the gym. So I go to gym at 11 o'clock in the morning the other day. It's packed. I go to the gym on a weekend, it's empty. Now that used to be just the opposite, right? If you went during the day, it was empty. If you went during the workday, it was empty. If you went on the weekend, it was packed. Now it's just the opposite. So, so I'm challenged with this idea, and I don't think anybody in my office feels more connected. I have two offices. One of them's remote. One of them's in person. The one in person, I find that they are really connected, and the one that's remote is not as connected. Let me put in my view and what I can see. So, what do you do differently? Because you have to do something differently if you're remote than if you're in person. Because if you're in person, you talk about, for example, you talk about, well, you're going to come in for purposeful to connect. Well, but the connections when you're in the office happen serendipitously, right? That you're having that connection just because you're there, not because you came in to have the connection. So it almost feels like a little forced to say, okay, well, you're going to come in this one day a week and you're going to connect with people. Darn it, you're going to connect with people, and that's what it's going to be. I'm sorry, but I'm having a tough time getting my arms around this.
I think it's fair. There's leaders that are struggling with this question, and the return to office mandate is frustrating for some because, and even just being in the office and not having employees really want to be there, it's a struggle. And I get leaders are in this sort of sandwich world where they're trying to meet demands and then also make sure that their workforce is engaged and they have, they're getting resistance, which is difficult. But I mean, the data is quite robust. It's global data and it's looking at entrepreneurs and large organizations. It's, tens of thousands of data points and employees that were represented. And now we're seeing that grow. But I think the most important thing in what you're asking is like, how do we engage that group that is going to be remote? And I think they're pulling everyone back in the office has proven that that's not successful. And 5 days a week is actually going to be a detriment to revenue and shareholder value. And I mean, and I mean, I know entrepreneurs are not necessarily dealing with shareholder value, but they're dealing with, well, if they're a startup, they
Sure,
are.
shareholder value, they're the shareholder.
Yeah, their shareholder value and they're dealing with, revenue, all of those metrics that matter to CEOs. What they find is that fully remote is not the most capitalist way of looking at it. It's not the best work mode. If you're purely in a capitalist mode and all you're caring about is that data point, hybrid is the best approach where it is several days in the office. It could be one or two. It doesn't need to be three even, but a couple days in the office. And 5 days is actually worse than fully remote. They're finding that the data shows that people are just feeling exhausted. There's a lot of burnout that we're seeing across the board. So unless we're fully preventing burnout, 5 days in the office actually adds to burnout. So we need to look at prevention for people to feel like they're engaged and give them their time back and make sure that that's prioritized their well-being and work-life balance. But having a couple days in the office every week is still very good because we do need face-to-face time. And that's why I say, I'm not advocating for fully remote because it isn't the most, it isn't the perfect mode for making the most money and having the best kind of outcomes measures. So we need to just look though at when people are coming in. It's not just about forcing connection. It's about bringing rituals back like we used to
Right,
have.
exactly.
We've lost rituals. It's like bringing rituals back, bringing things back that we've lost sight of, understanding that friendships and relationships really matter and we need to build them. So it isn't just, forced fun, but it is creating those serendipitous moments. We found that even 20 minutes of having lunch once a week within
Yep.
one organization in this Cornell study, that even just 20 minutes once a week eating together improves job satisfaction, engagement, connectivity. So it's more about just starting small and also recognizing that what happened in the pandemic is that people did develop a lot of social anxiety. They were told that other human beings are scary and that they could hurt you. And that has developed this subconscious habit of feeling nervous around other people, not networking.
Mhm.
Younger generation right now are having a really difficult time with the soft skill of networking and conflict management. So we have to use that time in the office to train those soft skills, to develop people in a way that's really focused on continuous learning, to have lunch together, to bring rituals back. And we're not doing that. It's just come back in the office, and maybe you're doing it, but most organizations that I work with are not focusing on that. Instead, it's just a lot of overwork. And when people are overworked, they don't have time for doing the rituals or the friendships
So,
or that.
so I saw a study not too long ago that suggested this is one researcher, of course, that was suggesting that a work day of 7 to 1 is a much more productive work day than a work day of 8 to 5. Have you looked at those studies? Is that, I mean, uh, is it not just the number of days in the week in the office, but actually the number of hours in the office?
Well, see, and I'm a big proponent of goals, not hours. If you give people goals, then and you're really good at understanding what people's capacity are, and if people work fast or work slow, or you learn when you set goals that it's more about understanding what that person's needs are and what their strengths are and where their deficits are so you can train them. When we just focus on people being there and the hours they work, it actually ends up going against us. It's antithetical to hitting those targets. So, even the 4-day work week we found, or 35-hour work week, I don't like to say 4-day because often it's just 35 over 5 days. People end up being equally or more productive than those people working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. We actually have found that anything over 50 hours, you're not actually getting any more work done. So this idea of hustle culture in the startup world, in the entrepreneurial world, it's not, it's a myth. We need to just be better at having bespoke and, personalized goal setting with our individual employees, and managers need to run that. And then figure out, how I can leverage the best and most optimal way that my employees working. And often we get it really wrong in this world.
Do
And
you,
I've been there and I've done that. So I know, you
do
know.
you think it is individual specific, or do you think it's more across the company? So, are there particular individuals that you think, well, maybe their job is more of a remote job, and others that need to be in the office 4 or 5 days a week?
One of the things that, and I get asked that too, is this personal? Is this across the board? I think what is across the board is that we need to have personalized and individual uh, relationships. And this is why at the employer level, we need to really empower our managers to make those decisions. However, I do think that there are some roles that are really work really well remotely. When you look at programmers and software developers, and those folks are they require heads down time, and they need at least 3 or 4 hours of uninterrupted time every day. And when you're in a open office, your back is to the rest of the organization, the way the space is set up can really impact that. But I think someone in marketing and sales, that's a totally different kind of relationship. And so it is understanding the role, the team dynamic. But I do think that everyone does need time where it's protected, where they can get that administrative work done, and they do not need to do that in the office. So it's about knowing what part of your week, and this is why I think Microsoft does a good job. They have 50% time, but it really is manager led. So they have discussions kind of every week about when people will be in the office and making sure that time is productive when they're together, and then when they're out, and it's fluid. And sometimes you might need more in a project maybe to get it over the finish line, and sometimes you might need less. And having that fluidity of being able to be agile is one of the best ways for us to be leading in this very fluid changing environment of remote work.
Yeah. So speaking of fluid and changing, so AI is like, I'm watching, I mean, we all are, right? We're watching AI develop so fast just in the last 9 months. I was in my mastermind group 9 months ago. One of my colleagues, he shows us this AI, and it was good. Last week he shows it, and it's like you can't even tell it's not. I mean, this was a sales call. You can't tell it's not a real person. You literally cannot tell, and that's how fast it's evolving. And so um, he was actually able to decrease his appointment setters from like 300 to five. So how should we be dealing now as entrepreneurs? We're good with that. We've got it. For us, it's change or die, right? So not a big issue for us. But with our employees, a lot of them, they're worried about it. They're stressed about it. And from my point of view, they're just going to be more productive. How do you know? How do you deal with that from a culture standpoint?
This is a huge question right now. I just released my LinkedIn course that's for leaders, AI anxiety to AI action, and really dealing with the stress of AI anxiety. There's a new term that Gallup came up with, FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete. And I think that there is this feeling across the board from employees, and that's hard for culture. But you also want to be a leader that's going to be able to rapidly adopt AI that's going to help you and
Right.
make you more effective and efficient and a lot more money. And I think what is getting missed in the communication right now is that we're not showing how our employees can be partnering with AI. We're finding that a lot of their tasks are being replaced, but because we're so busy, and this does happen in the entrepreneurial world, we get sort of heavy focused on the future. We forget sort of the development of our employees at all times, but we should be making sure that when those repetitive tasks are taken away, that we're giving that employee an opportunity to develop their skills in a value added way. Instead, I keep hearing from a lot of employees, well, now AI is doing the things I was doing. I'm supposed to be doing more creative work, or, for example, think you're a person that gets your data. Now the AI is mining data for you, and that was something that you were doing. Well, why are we not training employees then to be able to interpret results or
Right.
provide results and present results to clients? We're missing that piece of when it's taken away, we're not developing them. And we're going to have a talent shortage of people that cannot support AI if we're not actually doubling down on this balance between future readiness, labor, market readiness, our employees being skilled up, and adopting AI at a sustainable pace. So there's that mix of having both that I think is a gap right now. And also just explaining to employees, like, this doesn't mean that I'm making you obsolete. I'm actually going to enhance your job. Here's how I'm going to do it. Let's create a pathway. This is how we're going to map it out, create goals so people feel like they're moving along that path towards their goals. And you're going to have a really excited workforce about AI, which is exactly what you want. If they're afraid, they're going to be resistant, and then they're either going to quit or they're not going to embrace the technology that you're onboarding.
Well, I think one of the great things about AI is it's really fun, right? Because you can't break it. You can't break AI, and so many
I
employees.
think that's CBD, Tom. I'm not sure. It might break us first. We'll
Well, it
see.
might, but what I'm saying is that you play with it. It's not gonna. It's you're not gonna break it, right?
Right. Yes.
There's
Yes.
there's certain equipment you play with it. You could break it, but
Right.
you can't.
Yes.
You can't break AI. You can only make it better, and it actually, I think, allows people to be more engaged and use their brains more and actually do things that aren't dreary things. So I think you're spot on that. I think AI, it's almost like in my world, it's going from are you the accuracy person or are you the analysis person? And analysis is so much more fun and engaging than accuracy.
I love that you said that because I use AI and it's been so helpful. I didn't have, ChatGPT and these other tools when I was writing The Burnout Epidemic. Now I can go and say, hey, can you give me 10 academic journals and, that are looking at, you know, um, supporting this argument or negating this argument, making sure that I have a balanced approach to my journalism. It gives you a lot of data. I mean, I'm a person that's still, I don't have a ghostwriter. I write my own stuff, and I feel like that's just I'm old school like that. I still read paper books. But I like the idea that, it can indices stuff for me. It can fact check, and you have to fact check AI, but it's gotten so much better. But it's just being able to provide you with the kind of time that we didn't have before. And, we're getting our time back with AI if we're using it right. And, being afraid of it is unfortunate because you're not actually developing your own skills. And so we need to get employees to play around with it, to experiment. Another thing I recognize too is that a lot of people don't realize how much AI they have in their own life.
Mhm.
And so they're afraid of something because they see it as this kind of big iRobot, like mass extinction kind of technology. And when you ask people, do you use Siri? Do you use, maps? Like there's a lot of things that
Right.
people are just using. And once you let them know how familiar they actually are with AI, they are more comfortable thinking about it in a much more normalized way.
So it sounds like part of it is actually creating a culture of creativity and play where you can
Yes.
actually have fun. I've always felt if you don't have fun at your job, why are you there?
Mhm.
That's my perspective on life. But um, to me, AI is the opportunity to do that. Get rid of my non-creative tasks. Get rid of, here's a question I've got for you. So, how do you go about encouraging employees who've been doing the same thing for a long time, right? And encourage them to, hey, figure out how to make your job more fun, more productive, and more profitable.
It's one of the things, even just that, the tactics that I suggest to managers and how you can get people excited about it. Think about a problem that you want to solve in your life and then figure out where AI could maybe come in and solve that for you. And it can be experimental in your life and at work, but it's a great project to do as a team. And every week you kind of report on how it has improved your life, where you found the lessons, where it went wrong, And I think what the more we do that and see that it can problem solve for us, and we're actually being led by our leaders to be more autonomous and have agency in how we figured that out, the less it becomes top down. Here's AI, you're adopting it. More like, hey, I can test this. I can be curious. And creative cultures are, some of the best cultures. Curious cultures are the ones where, you get this ability to learn. And when you put that in an employee's hands to be experimental, it totally changes the way that they feel about it. And then you can go deeper into your own organization. What are some things we want to solve? Here's some big, hairy, audacious goals. How could we implement AI? And if it's a weekly sort of curiosity meeting around AI, it needs to be 20 minutes, half an hour. It really does change the dynamic.
I love that. I love that. All right. So let's wrap up with two or three things that you think that the an entrepreneur ought to do um, to improve the culture in their company, especially given that I think most companies are at least they're either virtual or they're somewhat virtual.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I always say is, as a leader, what do I want to see changed? And then do a self audit. How many things am I saying I want to be changed, but I'm not doing? Am I not being curious about AI? Am I not, leading the charge when it comes to building relationships? Am I telling everyone I want them to focus more on burnout prevention, but I'm burning out? I mean, all of those things, employees can't be what they can't see. So modeling the change is critical. And that requires a bit of a self audit and maybe even some, openness to having conversations with employees. I call them stay interviews. You want to find out why people want to stay and why they want to go. And having those sit downs to say, like, let's have full transparency here. And I want to know, like, what it is that you love about your job. What do you want to stop doing because it feels tedious? And what are the things that you're missing? This is a great opportunity for an AI conversation to say, like, where do you feel your strengths are? And Where do you think that you need more training and development? Where do you see your career going? These are all opportunities for us to gather data that isn't like a engagement or looking back survey. This is just sitting down, with your people and making sure that you're modeling the behaviors you want to see change and asking your employees how you can come together to do that. And then you really need to have actionable measures on if you are living up to the expectations. We see a lot of these conversations fall flat, and then employees just feel like, why bother? What's the point? Why am I here? We need to show, okay, I'm going to do this in 6 months, or this is going to be incremental. I plan to get here in a year, and then talk about those outcomes, making sure that we build cognitive hope right now. We're hopeless. We're feeling a sense of hopelessness, and it's really driving disengagement. And that's just because of poly crisis and all the other crap going on in the world. We need to be leaders and give our employees hope. We do that by setting goals, meeting them, making sure that we set our goals and demonstrate that we're meeting them too. And then together you're going to have this really great momentum, and that it's incremental, but you'll feel it change. And that's what I think is really about how we need to build culture right now.
I love it. I often think about working with employees like parenting teenagers. Um, and just because teenagers, for example, they want to push the envelope, but they also want boundaries. And I feel that with employees a lot. They want freedom, but they also want they want to feel like they're okay, right? They don't want to feel like you're just being put out there. If they wanted to feel that, they just go start their own business, right? That's what entrepreneurs feel. So we don't put boundaries, and that's the difference between entrepreneurs and employees, basically. So, in final words, how do you? What's the most important thing we do when it comes to this freedom with boundaries?
It's a good question. I mean, we have different thought process on that. Some leaders, really good ones, say, I spent all this money recruiting that person and hiring that person, attracting them. And, I hired an adult. I expect them to act like an adult, right? And I think that there is an element of when you have very clear reciprocal like social contracts with people, that's when you see people work to their most optimal. And it is about the agency to say, as an employee, and giving your employee that autonomy to say, this is where I want to get to, and then you hold them accountable to that, and they hold themselves accountable to that. That's where it's ideal, where you can have a culture of feedback, positive and constructive, and you're open to that. But you can only do that if people feel psychologically safe. If they feel like, okay, I can make a mistake and that's okay. Or, I didn't actually hit that goal, but I'm getting closer to it and then we can revisit it. These are the ways that we should look at it is not necessarily as top down, but more as us working in a social contract. For years, work has been transactional and it still is, but that's changed because now we're in a social contract. If we're going to ask employees to be working in all different aspects of their life, sometimes when there's a big project, you're working really long hours. If we're asking people to take time away from their personal lives, we need to make sure that we meet them where they're at. It's a two-way street. And I think more employees in the workforce are sort of demanding that. And so we need to meet the moment as leaders. And that means coming up with plans together and then being successful together and sharing in that success when we meet it.
I love that. It's a social contract. So, um, which is way different than when I started in the
Yes.
workforce. There was no social contract. The
Oh,
contract was, I'm going to pay you, you're going to work long hours. That was the only contract. And it's clearly we've been through such a rapid evolution in the last few years, right? I mean, I think more than so I've been in my career 45 years. So the last 5 years have been way more accelerated in change than the previous 40 years. Not even close to how much things have changed in the last 5 years. So the book is Why Are We Here? Creating a Work Culture Everyone Wants. Our guest has been Jennifer Moss. Jennifer, this has been delightful. Where can we find more about your work and what you're doing?
Jennifer-moss.com. There's all of my work and my HBR articles. I write for Harvard Business Review, and there's a ton of, lots of stuff that I write about there on this topic. And then, all my courses and books are all there too.
I love it. So thank you so much. You saw me looking down. I'm taking notes, right? That's a good
Great.
sign when the when the interviewer is taking notes. So it's been terrific. And
Thank
I
you.
think the message here is that when we do develop this culture, not only is our life more fun and more exciting,
Yeah.
but it really we do make more money. And of course, in my world, we're making more money and we're paying less tax. But that is the key to really having a strong sense of in our of our company name, wealthability. What's your wealthability? Part of it is, you know, I might say, what's your culture ability in your workforce? And I love that. Thank you, Jennifer. And everyone, please share with your friends and look for more episodes where we can actually help you deal with an ever-changing workforce on the Wealthability Show.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.